There's four criteria for critical thinking that you will want to be familiar with, hopefully not just to get this question right, but also to be a critical thinker, to be someone who makes a reasoned judgment about the world and the life that you live. So the first of these four criteria is that there's very few truths that don't need to be tested. In other words, just because everybody thinks it's true doesn't mean that it is, and that we should stop looking for evidence. A few years ago when I was a kid, we were taught to believe there were 9 planets. I used to watch Saved by the Bell, and I had the whole little mnemonic device they gave me to remember all 9 planets. Well, that's great, because today we don't say that there are 9 planets. Pluto has actually been demoted. Pluto's no longer a planet. Well, if we had all just stopped looking at the planets and stopped looking at what should define a planet, then we would have just said for the rest of our lives that all 9 of those things are the same and there's 9 planets. So again, there's very few truths that we don't need to look for evidence for. The second criteria is even when we find evidence, all evidence is not equal in quality. Hopefully you know that if you've been exposed to different types of research methods. You know, hopefully now, that correlations do not show cause and effect, that only experiments do. But you also know that if you don't do an experiment correctly, then its results are meaningless. So evidence is great, but you want to be able to look at the source. You want to be able to look at how that evidence was gathered. Source is a very important part of our third criterion, and that is that just because someone is an authority on something doesn't mean everything they say is true. We tend to grow up thinking our parents are authorities, and we usually have a moment where we realize, yikes, they don't know everything. And if for those of you who are parents, you know this. Sometimes your kids look to you and they say, but why this, why that, why that? We assume sometimes that because someone is an authority that they are always right. We do that with parents, we do that with politicians, with church leaders, with teachers, with textbooks. I guarantee you every word that comes out of my mouth is not correct. So just because someone is an authority doesn't mean that what they say is true. Infomercials are the worst about this. They will put a lab coat on somebody and slap the word doctor in front of their name, and they will try to sell you any number of products. But what they might not tell you is that that person might be a doctor of history, and they're trying to sell you a quesadilla maker that's supposed to be really nutritious. That's a ridiculous example, but believe it or not, that kind of thing happens. So you want to question the source. What are they an authority in? And even if they're in an authority position with what they're talking about, it still doesn't mean they're true. Question me. Question your textbook. This textbook has gone through different editions. Psychology has changed a lot through the years. Why? Because people questioned it, and they found out that something wasn't quite as true as we thought that it was. The next criteria that I want you to be familiar with is really important. You have to have an open mind to be a critical thinker. If you think you already know the answer to a question, you'll never learn anything else about it. You have to be willing to admit that you're wrong. You have to be willing to admit that someone else might know something that you don't. Being open-minded is just a great way to engage in healthy discussions, healthy debates. Being open-minded doesn't mean that you'll change your opinion. It just means that you'll have a better understanding of why you believe what you do, why you think what you do. And you have to be open-minded to learn anything in this course. If you came into this course thinking you know everything there is to know about psychology in the world, then I can't teach you a thing, and you're not going to learn anything. You just have to be open-minded in education. So critical thinking, 4 criteria. There's very few truths that don't need to be tested. You have to question the evidence, because all evidence is not equal in quality. Just because someone is an authority figure does not mean everything they say is true. And then finally, you have to be open-minded.